We're going to move quickly into the next session, Unpacking Parity in the Workplace. And I'm thrilled to introduce Jill Wesley. Jill is in partnerships with the Female Quotient, the FQ, where she advises on strategic relationships, program design, and panel curation to give a platform to diverse voices and innovative solutions. And she has a great lineup with Selena, Cuffe, and Katica. So I'm very excited to hear about this session. Jill, welcome. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me. It's great to see everybody.
Great to see you, and great to see you, Katica, and Selena as well. Jill, I'll turn it over to you.
Wonderful. Thanks again. Today, we are talking about unpacking parity in the workplace. And we can't reach true gender equality without corporations that are actively focused on implementing equal opportunity policies. So today we're going to discuss what it's going to take for companies to open up about the wage gap inequalities, how we can improve strategies for hiring and retaining female talent, and how companies and leaders can stay true to themselves by implementing a culture of accountability. And I'm really excited to dive into this topic with such fabulous leaders. And I would just love to start with you, Katica from Pipeline. Wonderful work you've done over the years. I'd like to get your perspective on why is implementing equal opportunity policies crucial to creating parity in the workplace, and talk a little bit about the work you do.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. It's nice to see you, Jill and Selena. So I'm Katica Roy. I'm the founder and CEO of Pipeline. Pipeline is actually a software platform that increases the financial performance of companies through closing the intersectional gender equity gap, so gender plus race and ethnicity and age. We would actually take it a step further from policies. We would actually, certainly policies are important. What's important as well are the decisions that we're actually making about our talent. So in addition to how we're hiring talent, how we're moving them around our organizations, how they're assessed through their performance reviews, so the value that they drive in organizations, how they're developed through succession planning, and then ultimately promoted up the corporate ladder, if you will. We found that within a company, it is not only the right thing to do, it's actually a massive economic opportunity. We started with research. We did a research study across 4,000 companies in 29 countries. And what we found was that for every 10% increase in intersectional gender equity, there's a 1 to 2% increase in revenue. So that's the model that our platform is based on, which is not only the right thing to do, but actually a massive economic opportunity. And then if you look at that from a macroeconomic perspective, for instance, just in the United States, through closing the gender pay gap, we could add $512 billion to the US economy. And that was actually pre-COVID, in which we lost 22 years of progress toward the gender pay gap. So right now, particularly with the economic fallout from COVID-19 in the US and globally, our global economy is at stake if we don't actually close these gaps and close them rapidly.
I appreciate what you're saying, giving the context about how policy fits into the whole ecosystem and approach from a strategic standpoint. But I like your shaping the language from it's not just crucial, it's critical, it's for survival. So I really appreciate what you've said. Hi, Selena, how's it going?
It's going well, Jill. How are you?
Good. I'm doing well. I'd love to hear your thoughts on policy and why it's crucial.
Yeah, I think I could not agree with Katica more. I think that we are in a situation today that really underscores that this opportunity is around parity is bigger than just the policy. It's because it makes good economic business sense to achieve parity because of the return on investment and the business results themselves. Now, obviously, where policy does fit in is in execution and implementation, right? The devil is always going to be in the details in terms of how you achieve parity and how you achieve business results. It's one thing to know that it makes economic sense to do so. It's another thing to explore ways to actually make that be reality. And I think that what Katica described in terms of following employees alongside their career journey to make sure that there is advancement there is mentorship, there is sponsorship, right? Because those are two very different things and sometimes get conflated. But it's ultimately working with a level of intentionality towards recognizing that parity is not only the right thing to do from a moral standpoint. We all understand and get the notion that half of our population is female. So why wouldn't women want to be at the table, not only with the seat, but also in positions of power, authority, and decision-making? Because as a result of the diversity that comes alongside having those perspectives reflected, comes the bubbling up of ideas that advance and innovate the way that solutions are provided and are designed to ultimately make our world a better place. Who wouldn't want to do that?
I like that. Absolutely. Thank you so much for your comments. And speaking of comments, I'd love to use the chat in this session. We have a large group of people who are joining us, and I want to welcome you and let you know that we're all in this together. So feel free to use the chat, and we want to have some engagement. And the next question, I think, may relate to a lot of people who are joining us. It's about how companies can do a better job being transparent with wage gap inequalities. And if you're joining us, in the comments, I'd love to see if any of you have had the experience of realizing that you were not earning as much as a peer, or you didn't have opportunities that they had. And Katica, I know that's a very big part of your story, having done all the right things and worked your way up, and having those moments, the moment when you realized there were male colleagues who were earning more than you. Can you tell us a little bit about your thoughts related to the transparency and maybe a bit about your own journey?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I'll tell a little bit about my journey, and then I'll talk about transparency and sort of what I believe is coming. But so I'm a breadwinner mom for a family of 4, and I fought to be paid equitably twice and won. I'll tell you one of those stories quickly, which is that when I was on maternity leave with my daughter, my boss was optimized, which is a fancy word for fired. And so when I came back, I was managing a team, and 2 days after I came back from maternity leave, I was asked to take on a new team. And then 2 weeks later, I was asked to take on a third team, which is a great opportunity, right? It's amazing opportunity. My male colleague was 1 pay grade higher than I was. He took on 1 additional team, but also received additional compensation for that new team. And I received nothing. So I called HR and my new boss and said, hey, this is a great opportunity. How do you want to make me whole on my compensation? And it was like 2 months of back and forth, but nothing happened. And I thought, well, there's got to be something that makes this illegal. So I did my research, and I found the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act, which changed the statute of limitations for equal pay. Uh-huh. And so what I did was I called HR and said, this is a Lilly Ledbetter issue. Every time you pay me, the statute of limitations starts over. Mm-hmm. And so to their credit, they increased my level, increased my pay, and gave me back pay. But it was really that moment that, I thought, well, this is certainly a story of success, but why did I have to spend my time researching my rights in order to be treated fairly? I was already a high performer and taking on additional work. What might that be? How might that be different? And I also inherited 2 teams, which also meant that I inherited the inequity of those 2 teams. And I was really committed that if you reported to me, I would do everything I could to ensure you had equity of pay and equity of opportunity. So I believe, I've written articles about transparency and pay. Whole Foods is certainly an example of that. But I also do believe there's public policy that will begin to change that. On the 7th anniversary of the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act, Barack Obama actually changed the pay reporting on the EEO-1 forms. It's the component 2. And so for the first time in US history, on September 30th, 2019, companies actually had to report their pay by gender and race and ethnicity. And I believe that we will actually begin to see more of that with the Biden administration. And I think we'll actually begin to see Vice President Harris during the presidential primaries actually had the most most advanced, if you will, equal pay policy, which was modeled after Iceland. And that is actually companies proving that they're paying equitably. And I believe that we will begin to see that not only as an issue of fairness, but as an issue of economic growth and opportunity. We know that right now we are paying for people to be paid inequitably. That's something that if you're a US taxpayer, you're paying for. Yeah. So that I believe, like we all pay for that. If you pay taxes, you pay for that. So I believe we'll actually begin to see more and more movement toward that. I think within companies, certainly we close the pay gap within companies, and we have seen more and more commitment to closing pay, but also closing value gaps. And I can talk a little bit about that, but I'll wait till another question.
Thank you for sharing your journey and having that turning point moment when you realize, oh my gosh, you had another full-time job fighting for what you were entitled to, and realizing there are millions of other women that are also up against those barriers. I'm curious from your standpoint, Selena, what have you had any personal experience over the years, and any thoughts you have around how companies can do a better job with the transparency related to pay inequality?
Sure. So I have for sure experience around this, but perhaps more on the side of ensuring that there is truly fair and equitable pay for all individuals, in addition to gender, also looking at the notion of what happens when you insert race into that equation and the variants that come along with. But to give a little bit of context, I feel like I am really in a fortunate position today, serving as president of an incredible joint venture that was started by NBA Hall of Famer Magic Johnson and the French food and facilities company Sodexo. The two of them 15 years ago decided that they wanted to do something to transform the way in which quality of life services were provided. And they thought very intentionally about who does the work and how does that work get reflected in a fair and equitable way for the people that are responsible for getting things done. So our organization has roughly 6,000 employees. Today, 70% of those employees are what I would define as either diverse or women. When you look at leadership, it's not quite 50%, but we are well on our way of having roughly 40% of our total leadership is either female or diverse. And getting to that place has not been by accident. So what I would say, especially in situations where a company may not know or employees aren't sure whether or not they are being paid fair and equitable, it really comes down to performance management. And what gets measured is what is actually acted upon. And so if there's ever a recommendation that I might have for leaders who may be listening in, or even employees who are curious, it really comes down to asking, how are we measuring these things? And in the process of measurement, there are specifically tools that are very helpful to make sure that people are following along and achieving these issues as a priority for the company. Just a few examples of things that I have used as a tool to understand how we are performing, not only in the context of employees, but also in the context of our suppliers, right? If we as a $600 million organization are spending hundreds of millions of dollars a year, we need to be tracking how many of those businesses are also owned by women, and the role that we play in the ecosystem to empower and advance those individuals is equally as important, because the statistics prove that whether you are female, whether you are minority, the chances of you also hiring like-minded and individuals that also are female or are minority are 5 to 10 times greater than in traditional companies. And so understanding and being very intentional about your performance management tool is probably one of the most strategic ways that you can stay on top of how you're performing and addressing those gaps. An example of a performance tool that I live by is OKRs, Objective Key Results. It is a great way to not only get your team to coalesce around specific priorities, usually no more than 5 to 10, but if the team is also bought into what those priorities are, and pay parity is one of those objectives, then everyone on the team is responsible for establishing key results that move that needle forward as aggressively or as moderately as you so choose. But doing nothing and or hoping that it changes on its own is not an option.
Not at all. And it's the transparency, the accountability, and measuring. I mean, it's knowing what you're working with, which really, truly matters. What are your thoughts on, and we can go in any order, the question we've gotten for decades: how do we hire and retain more women? What are your thoughts on the big question that feels like it? To me, it feels like it's hidden in plain sight, but it is an important question to address, because we need to do a better job. It's going to be a century before we reach parity, right?
57 years.
Okay, there we go. So I don't have time for that, right? We don't have time. So what would we tell organizations that they need to do and really take a look at when it comes to hiring and retaining talent?
Well, what the research shows is that the best way to attract diverse talent is to ensure that your existing diverse talent is successful, and not just in their current roles, but actually across your company, that they actually have equity of opportunity. One of the things that we have actually found through our implementations at Pipeline, and we essentially are a recommendations engine. So what we do is take there's 5 types of decisions that companies make across their employees: internal hiring, pay, performance, potential, and promotion. We run those through our algorithms, and if we find any bias, we make recommendations, right? So what we have found is that a couple things. One is that you can't close the gender pay gap by starting with pay. And that's because pay is the quantitative value that we place on our talent. But the actual value that we place on our talent happens before that in performance and potential. So when our algorithms actually read through performance reviews, we look for 2 things. One are bias phrases. So those, so things like women being rewarded for unpaid work, or their emotional state being commented on more often. And we found, on average, about 1/3 of all performance reviews actually contain bias. That actually leads to about 4% of the time women receive lower performance ratings. That rating actually then impacts your potential score, which is actually how you're developed for future leadership roles, as well as your base pay and your variable pay. We need to focus on that, and also shift the focus away from what has historically been fixing women. So a lot of the programs historically have been women's leadership programs, or encouraging more women to apply for jobs, or teaching them how to negotiate. Well, all of that doesn't take into account that women aren't broken. The system is broken. The system was actually never designed to value women equitably. Yes, right. So we need to, right, for instance, like in the applying for jobs, that piece, that's only half the story, that, women will only apply for jobs if they have 100%, men if they have 60% of the qualifications. Well, the person sitting on the other side of the table is actually using that same criteria.
Right.
So we're only telling them half the story. So that piece of really changing the way that we value our internal talent solves both of the issues of retention, as well as hiring new talent into the organization. It's also really good for shareholders. One of the things that we know from research, in addition to Pipeline's research, is that on average, like in normal times, so in times that we are not in right now, there is actually a 25 percentage point stock price swing for companies that are more equitable versus those that aren't. When you are in an economic recession or depression, which is what we are in right now, there's actually a 50 percentage point stock price swing. That is, companies that put equity at the core of their crisis management strategy actually saw a 35% increase in their stock price. Those that didn't actually saw their stock price fall by 15%. So this is not only good for employees and for women, it's good for everyone, including your shareholders.
And those are huge numbers that you're pointing to. It really is. And the whole concept of telling women what they need to fix has been a challenge for decades. I spent a number of years as a consultant and as a speaker doing programs on women's leadership and, you know, how to develop our executive presence. And then I realized, hold up, we're working within a system. And then I did what I called an apology tour for a full year and went back out and said, you know, let's stop trying to fix ourselves. We need to look at the systems that we're in the middle of and what we're up against. And I love how you're saying it's only half the story. You know, we're only getting one side. I appreciate that, Katica. Tell me, Selena, your thoughts. Oh, Angela just gave us a great comment. Women aren't broken, the systems are broken. Yeah, I appreciate that. And we've been internalizing a lot of these pressures over the years. If we could just do this one more thing,
that's right.
Maybe we'll be able to get the job or be able to stay in a healthy work culture. What are your thoughts, Selena, about hiring and retaining women? So how we can do a better job?
Yeah, I would say that it really depends on the what you're looking to hire and retain, but lots of solutions either way. I think if we're talking about managerial and where there is a college degree required, there are just low-hanging fruit opportunities. Let's consider going to recruit at Wesley. Let's go to Spelman. Let's go to Sarah Lawrence. There are hundreds of schools that are dedicated to women. To me, that just seems like an easy way to get your foot into the door of attracting more talent that you can select from. In addition, if we're looking at really the opportunity that exists across general schools and universities, there are affinity groups, women's students associations that you can also pull from. On the frontline side, I think that there are equally a number of ways to approach it, from paid search opportunities on the internet. There are a number of really neat startups that are trying to address and provide greater access to business opportunities to frontline employees, like Wonolo, which is spelled WONOLO. They are another organization that has achieved, again, because of the intentionality of their performance management tools, I believe that they are close to parity around the gender relationship of their employees versus more traditional companies. I also think that there is an opportunity to collaborate strategically with organizations like WeBank, which is the Women's Business Enterprise National Council, to say to them, here are our goals. How can you help us with the landscape of women that are either business owners, independent contractors who bring certain skill sets to bear, regardless of education? Help us to realize our goals with respect to gender parity. So those are just a few of the ways that I have seen it happen. Personally, I think that it also is important that the male leaders that you have in positions of power are able to understand that this is a business imperative. And if they want to see the business results that most companies aspire to, which is to be number one or have the competitive advantage, that they play one of the most critical roles in all of this, which is to be very intentional about the slate of candidates that they are looking at, regardless of level, to ensure that there are always women who are presented, or don't see the slate. It's as simple as that.
Right, right. And your comment, Selena, dovetails really nicely into Pablo Perez just asked a question about your thoughts on mentorship, allyship, and thinking about how men can do more to help support the initiatives and be intentional and strategic about things. What are your thoughts around mentorship and allyship, whether it's from other ERGs or other from men who are working with us?
I actually, I appreciate allyship, but I want people to be accomplices. Allies can wave at you from the sidelines and wish you well and hope for the best. Accomplices are willing to get in there and do the work with you. I feel the same way about mentorship. Yes, it's great that someone wants to tell me what I need to do and give me those tips. That matters, right? Especially if I don't have the exposure. But once you have the exposure, you need someone who is going to champion you. Yeah. And not just one person. You need a tribe to champion, a tribe to advocate, because that's what's making the difference between whether or not either one gets promoted or gets the job altogether, but especially when it comes time to determine whether or not I'm getting paid the same as my peer. It really requires someone to be, or multiple people to be in the room and say, hey, let's really think about this here. If for any other reason, but to mitigate the risk of being found, without your pants on, and that you are discriminating based on gender. No one wants to have that conversation. And the reality, unfortunately, is corporations sometimes don't act until the scandal requires them to do so.
Right.
Yes. And as Katica just expressed, why do that when you already know that it makes better business sense and you're going to yield better results by just doing it the right way?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And challenging assumptions. So many folks never really had to think deeply about any of these issues and assume that this is the way it's always been. So I appreciate that answer you gave, Selena. And in our remaining minutes, Katica, I'd love to get your thoughts on what actions we've had great content from both of you, strategy, ways people can shift the way that they're working. In our remaining moments, Katica, what would you say companies can do to take action? Like, there's been a lot of talk. What would be your recommendations to really put things into action?
So we talk about a lot about over-indexing and under-indexing. We've over-indexed on awareness and under-indexed on action. We've over-indexed on mentorship and under-indexed on sponsorship, on actually taking action. Last year, in a matter of 8 weeks, we actually saw digital acceleration catapult forward 5 years. And part of that is actually in the future of work, or in the workplace, in actually how we make people decisions. We have the opportunity now with artificial intelligence and cloud computing, with advanced technologies, to actually hardwire equity into the future of work. This is no longer something that might exist. It does exist. It is what pipeline is one of the examples about, a system that actually enables companies to take action. One of the things, just to give you an example, is that the average Fortune 500 company has 60,000 employees. And we've discovered through our implementations that there's 3 key decisions that they make across their talent each year, which is performance, potential, and pay, right? So that's 180,000 opportunities for the average Fortune 500 to move toward equity each and every year. Across the Fortune 500, it's 90 million opportunities each and every year. That's what we need to do. We need to be committed. We need to move from pledges and public commitments to action, and social media to action. We need to see this through the decisions that companies are making. And we have the technology to actually catapult that forward and make it a reality.
And that's what we want, is to have these changes happen at scale. And knowing that there are leaders such as the 2 of you who are day in and day out helping to move culture and society and policy forward is really remarkable. And I thank you both for your time. It was wonderful to have this exchange with you, and you shared so many valuable insights. So thank you so much.